In 1837, England passed the Registration Act. Before that year, if you wanted to prove you were born, you asked your church. If the church burned down, or if your family never attended, or if the parish simply didn't keep good records, you had nothing. Then, in a single legislative session, the state said, from now on, every birth will be recorded. Not just nobles, not just landowners, everyone. Within 18 months, clerks in hundreds of newly created civil offices were filing reports in identical formats. The system didn't grow. It appeared. And it appeared in nearly the same form, in nearly the same decade, across regions that had no coordination. The United States began statewide registration in Massachusetts in 1841. France formalized it in 1792, but expanded it aggressively after 1800. Prussia introduced civil birth records in 1874. Belgium in 1796. The Netherlands in 1811. Sweden in 1686, but restructured it entirely in the 1850s. Different governments, different languages, different political systems. The same bureaucratic architecture. This is a documentary exploration of historical patterns. It does not claim certainty. It presents observations, timelines, and unanswered questions. All interpretations remain open. Civil registration is considered one of the foundations of the modern state. It allows governments to tax, conscript, educate, and track their populations. But that logic runs backward. In 1837, England didn't have universal education. It didn't have income tax. It didn't have a welfare system that required proof of identity. The demand for birth certificates came after the system was already in place. The infrastructure preceded the need. And when you look at the details, the scale starts to feel wrong. Let's start with the physical system. In England, the 1837 Act divided the entire country into 619 registration districts. Each district had a superintendent registrar. Below them were 2,193 sub-districts, each with a local registrar. Every registrar kept duplicate records. One stayed local. One went to the General Register Office in London. This wasn't a pilot program. It was total coverage from day one. The General Register Office opened in a building on the Strand. It had filing systems, clerical staff, and standardized forms already printed. The first quarterly return was submitted in September 1837, just 3 months after the law passed. There was no ramp-up period. Now consider what that required. Over 2,000 registrars had to be hired, trained, and equipped. Offices had to be established. Forms had to be designed and distributed. A centralized filing system had to be built in London to store millions of records that hadn't been created yet. And it all launched on schedule. In Massachusetts, the system began in 1841 with similar speed. Town clerks were required to file annual returns to the Secretary of State. The first statewide report was published in 1842. It included births, deaths, and marriages from 301 towns. By 1844, the state had printed and distributed 20,000 copies of standardized registry books. The question isn't whether these systems worked. They did. The question is, how were they ready so quickly? France offers the earliest example. The 1792 law transferred marriage and birth registration from the Catholic Church to civil authorities. The logic was ideological, removing the Church's control over personal records during the Revolution. But the scope was staggering. Every commune in France was required to maintain a civil registry. That meant over 40,000 local offices, each with a designated official, each filing duplicate records with regional archives. The system was implemented within 2 years. By 1800, millions of birth records had been filed. By 1810, the administrative structure was so stable that Napoleon used it to track conscription across the empire. But in 1792, France was in the middle of a revolution. The economy was collapsing. The government was unstable. Entire regions were in open revolt. And yet the registration system rolled out on time, in uniform format, across the entire country. No major delays. No partial implementation. The administrative similarity is the most unsettling part. When you compare birth registration systems across Europe and North America in the 19th century, The differences are superficial. The structure is nearly identical. Each system used local clerks or registrars, duplicate record-keeping, centralized archives, standardized forms, quarterly or annual reporting cycles. In England, registrars submitted quarterly returns. In Massachusetts, town clerks submitted annual returns. In France, commune officials submitted monthly summaries to regional prefects. The timing varied. The formats were nearly identical. And these systems didn't evolve from earlier models. Most of them had no earlier models. Before 1800, birth records were kept by churches, inconsistently with no central coordination. After 1840, nearly every industrialized state had a unified civil registration system. The gap between those two conditions is less than 50 years. The official explanation is straightforward. States needed to track populations for taxation, military service, and public health. Industrialization required reliable demographic data. Bureaucracy expanded because governments were becoming more complex. That explanation works if you assume the need came first. But the evidence shows the opposite. England introduced civil registration in 1837. The first Compulsory Education Act came in 1880. The first universal welfare system came in 1911. Income tax became permanent in 1842, 5 years after the registration system was already functioning. The system wasn't reactive. It was anticipatory. It was built for a state structure that didn't fully exist yet. And it was built everywhere in the same decade using the same logic. There's one more detail that doesn't fit. In 1837, the General Register Office in London was designed to store records for the entire population of England and Wales indefinitely. The filing system was built for scale. At the time, England's population was around 15 million. But the system was built as if the population would grow far larger, and as if those records would need to be accessible for generations. Which of course they were. But in 1837 no one knew that yet. The United States offers the clearest view of the pattern. In 1850, the federal census recorded 23 million people. By 1900, it recorded 76 million. That's a population increase of over 300% in 50 years. But the infrastructure didn't follow that growth. It preceded it. The Erie Canal opened in 1825. It connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean, cutting shipping costs by 95%. At the time, the population of New York State was 1.3 million. Most of it lived along the coast. The canal was 363 miles long. It required 83 locks. It took 8 years to build and cost over $7 million, equivalent to roughly $200 million today. And when it opened, there weren't enough people in the interior to justify it. Buffalo, at the western terminus, had a population of around 2,400 in 1825. Rochester had fewer than 10,000. Syracuse didn't exist as a city yet. The canal wasn't built for the population that existed. It was built for the population that would arrive. And it worked. Within 15 years, the towns along the canal had grown 10 times over. By 1850, Buffalo had 42,000 people. Rochester had 36,000. But the question remains, how did they know? The same timing appears in the rail network. Between 1830 and 1860, the United States laid over 30,000 miles of track. That's more than the rest of the world combined. Most of it went through regions with almost no population. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad began construction in 1828. The Illinois Central Railroad was chartered in 1851 to connect Chicago to the Gulf of Mexico, running through hundreds of miles of open prairie. At the time, Illinois had fewer than 900,000 people. Most of them lived in the southern part of the state. The railroad didn't go where people were. It went where people weren't. And just like the Erie Canal, the population followed. By 1860, Illinois had 1.7 million people. By 1900, it had nearly 5 million. The infrastructure created the demand. But someone had to build it first. Now look at the grain storage system. In the 1850s, Chicago began constructing grain elevators along the rail lines and canal docks. These weren't small warehouses. They were industrial-scale storage facilities, some capable of holding over 1 million bushels. In 1850, Chicago's population was 30,000. The grain elevators were designed to handle the output of farms that didn't exist yet, transported by rail lines that were still being laid, for a population that hadn't arrived. And by 1870, Chicago was the largest grain market in the world. The system worked, but it only worked because the infrastructure was already there. The elevators were built before the grain. The rail was laid before the farms. The canals were dug before the towns. Everything was backwards. Britain followed the same logic. The London sewer system was designed by Joseph Bazalgette and completed in 1875. It included 82 miles of main intercepting sewers and over 1,000 miles of street sewers. At the time, London's population was around 3.8 million. But Bazalgette designed the system to serve a population of 6 million. He doubled the estimated capacity, saying that he believed the population would grow and that it would be irresponsible to build only for the present. He was right. By 1900, London's population had reached 6.5 million. But that kind of foresight is unusual. Most infrastructure projects fail because they underestimate demand or run out of funding. Bazalgette's system came in under budget and ahead of schedule. And it was so over-engineered that parts of it are still in use today, serving a population 3 times larger than what he planned for. The same pattern appears in water systems, gas networks, and telegraph lines. In the 1840s, New York City began constructing the Croton Aqueduct, a 41-mile system designed to deliver 90 million gallons of water per day. The city's population at the time was around 300,000. The system was built for a population of over 1 million, and by 1860 that population existed. In Britain, gas lighting was installed across London in the 1810s and 1820s, long before most of the city had a use for it. The infrastructure was laid into neighborhoods that were still being built. The gas mains went in first. The houses came after. Telegraph lines were strung across the United States in the 1840s, connecting towns that barely existed. The first transcontinental telegraph line was completed in 1861, linking California to the rest of the country. At the time, California had fewer than 400,000 people. But the line was built anyway. And within a decade, it was carrying thousands of messages a day. The administrative systems mirrored the physical infrastructure. In the 1840s, Britain established the General Board of Health, the Poor Law Commission, and the Registrar General's Office, 3 centralized agencies designed to manage health, welfare, and population data at a national scale. None of these agencies were responses to crises. They were precautionary. The Board of Health was created in 1848, the same year as a cholera outbreak. But the administrative structure had been debated and designed years earlier. The outbreak didn't create the system. It justified it. The same is true in the United States. The Department of the Interior was established in 1849. Its responsibilities included managing public lands, conducting the census, overseeing Native American affairs, and regulating patents. In 1849, most of the land it was supposed to manage hadn't been surveyed yet. The census it oversaw was still using handwritten forms. The patent system was processing fewer than 1,000 applications a year. But the department was structured as if it would eventually manage millions of acres, track tens of millions of people, and process tens of thousands of patents annually. Which it did. But not in 1849. The postal system is the most striking example. In 1840, Britain introduced the penny post, a uniform postal rate that allowed anyone to send a letter anywhere in the country for 1 penny. Before that, postage was paid by the recipient and calculated by distance. It was expensive, complicated, and inefficient. The penny post simplified everything. 1 price, prepaid stamps, national delivery. But it required a massive expansion of infrastructure. The number of post offices more than doubled within 10 years. Mail sorting centers were built in every major city. Dedicated mail trains were introduced. And the system was profitable almost immediately. In 1839, Britain sent 76 million letters. By 1850, that number had risen to 347 million. But the capacity was already there. The sorting centers, the rail lines, the clerks, they were hired and built before the volume increased. The United States introduced a similar system in the 1840s and 1850s, with the same results. Mail volume exploded, but the infrastructure was already in place to handle it. Someone built it first. There's a term that gets used in history to describe this period. The term is administrative revolution. It refers to the sudden expansion of state capacity between 1800 and 1850, the creation of centralized agencies, standardized forms, national databases, and professional bureaucracies. But revolutions are supposed to be reactive. They happen because something breaks. This one didn't. The administrative systems were built before the problems existed. The infrastructure was laid before the population arrived. The capacity was created before the demand appeared. And it all happened in the same 50-year window, across multiple countries with no central coordination. The timing is too tight. The scale is too large. The consistency is too precise. And no one talks about it. The word Tartaria appears on European maps starting in the 15th century. It referred to the vast territories of Central Asia, roughly corresponding to the lands controlled by Mongol and Turkic peoples. The name comes from Tatar, a term used by medieval Europeans to describe the nomadic groups they encountered through trade and conflict. By the 19th century, the term had lost its geographic precision. It appeared on older maps but was disappearing from newer ones as European cartography became more detailed. It was a label, not a unified empire, not a single civilization. But in recent years, the term has been repurposed. Online communities have begun using Tartaria as shorthand for a different idea, that the infrastructure of the 19th century feels too advanced, too coordinated, too complete to have been built from scratch in such a short time. They point to the same things this script has: the identical administrative systems, the over-engineered infrastructure, the timing compression, the anticipatory design. And they ask, what if this wasn't built by the nations that claimed it? What if it was inherited? That interpretation is speculative. But the observations it's based on are not. There are three ways to interpret the evidence. The first is conventional. Industrialization and state formation happened quickly because of technological breakthroughs, economic pressure, and political will. The infrastructure was anticipatory because planners were optimistic. The systems were similar because ideas spread. The second is institutional. The 19th century inherited administrative frameworks from earlier periods: Roman roads, medieval trade networks, monastic record-keeping, and formalized them rapidly under industrial capitalism. The third is the one associated with Tartaria, that the physical and bureaucratic infrastructure of the industrial era was inherited from a previous system that has been misattributed or erased from the historical narrative. All three interpretations share the same evidence. They differ only in how they explain the timing. What remains consistent is this: in 1837, England built a registration system designed to track every birth in the country, before it had any functional reason to do so. That system required trained clerks, regional offices, centralized filing, and duplicate record-keeping across over 2,000 locations. It launched on time. It worked. And it looked nearly identical to systems appearing in France, Prussia, the United States, and Belgium within the same 50-year window. The infrastructure preceded the demand. The administrative capacity preceded the population. The design anticipated needs that hadn't yet materialized. Whether that reflects extraordinary planning, inherited structure, or something we don't yet have language for remains open. But the pattern is undeniable. The modern state didn't gradually develop the ability to track its citizens. It appeared fully formed in a single generation. And the systems it used looked the same everywhere. The evidence doesn't demand a conclusion. It demands attention. Because the infrastructure of the modern world, the systems we assume evolved slowly over centuries, was built in less than 50 years. And no one seems to find that strange.